Dírí bagus vergéid fáilte chuig céileoir na féile páric lumsa Marian Richardson. Guím banachtaí ar naomh páric ar bhar fad, díobh siúd ag baile in éireann, agus díobh se comá atá linn inniuh chula ceard gon down. Welcome to the National Gallery of Ireland in the heart of Dublin City. My guest today was everybody's darling on Dublin's club scene from the mid-90s onward and was already well known to Ireland's gay community. But she came to national and international attention on foot of her Abbey Theatre Noble Call speech delivered in February 2014. She's a national treasure and the Queen of Ireland herself, Panti Bliss. Panti. Fáilte wrote. But first things first, who are you wearing?
But very boringly, I'm nearly always wearing the same person. James David Seaver. These days he's the head, costume designer at the Gate. He wasn't when he started making clothes for me, but basically everything I wear, he's made, yeah. And he's fabulous.
And that is an orange.
Sequined? This is a caftan, and that I've had for years that James made for me. But at the moment, I'm carrying the extra COVID pounds.
Right.
And so I'm just...
and caftans are so forgiving.
They are so forgiving. They need a return to the high street, the caftan.
And it will be soon, I hope.
Yes, I hope so.
Let's go back to your Noble Call speech. And it's such a powerful portrayal of a gay life in 10 minutes. Fintan O'Toole, I think, described it as the most eloquent Irish speech since Daniel O'Connell was in his prime. I'm always curious as how long did it take you to write it? I know you just said it, but it was so structured.
Well, when people ask me this, I always feel guilty because the answer is not very long. I wrote it the night before. The show that was going on in the Abbey at the time, after every single performance, a different person did a noble call. And mine just happened to be that night. And I think 2 nights before I went to see the show myself, Richard Boyd Barrett gave the noble call that night. And so then the night before I was doing it, I wrote mine, what I wanted to say. The one thing, though, is, annoyance or a bit of righteous anger or whatever, it's very good for your creative juices. So, so I'd written it out. And I did it the same way that I do all of those things. I mean, because the other thing, of course, is, my job is basically that. I get up on stages in theatres and I do, hour-long one-woman monologues, So I'm very comfortable in that scenario. And so I wrote it out. I knew what I wanted to say, and I had a few key lines that I wanted to get word for word. And the rest, as long as I got the general gist, I was happy.
All these years later, what sense do you make of that speech now?
Well, I haven't watched it, I did at the time when I realized that people were really reacting to it, because I had no expectations of that. I thought I was just throwing this thing out in the Abbey, the people who were there would see it, and that would be the end of it. So I had no expectations about it. And then when I realized it was sort of reverberating, obviously I went back and looked at it, but I haven't looked at it in a long time. But what struck me about it, you described it as a great description of a gay life, but what was interesting to me was loads of other people who aren't gay but felt similar things in their own lives. That's where it was surprising to me, that it resonated with lots of people that I didn't expect it to. For example, people in wheelchairs, people with autism, anybody who ever feels different or something. And to this day, because it's a good few years now, 7 years or something, I still get emails, about it or because of it. So it's remarkable, yeah.
Well, it certainly opened many doors and ignited a conversation about the type of Ireland people wanted to have. I mean, it was discussed in the Dáil, Madonna tweeted, Stephen Fry, Graham Norton, the Pet Shop Boys.
Yeah, people all forget that, but that was my favourite part, when the Pet Shop Boys made a dance track out of it.
The best gay possible. Fantastic. So you became the voice of a modern, inclusive, diverse Ireland. It was quite the journey for someone who describes herself as an accidental activist.
Well, it's nuts, really. I got into all of this, running around nightclubs dressed as a cartoon, because it was stupid and fun and transgressive and underground and rule-breaking and punk, and a kind of two fingers to convention and all of that. And so I never had any desire or plan or expectation to get to the kind of situation I am nowadays, where I've sort of establishment and all of that, opening science fairs at Trinity. That wasn't on my, trajectory. So it's odd, but it also, I think, does say something really great about Ireland now, that somebody who is like me can, become co-opted by the establishment. I do my best to remain true to my discombobulating nature, but it is a funny place to end up in when, you got into this for the laugh.
But you can't say the unsayable really anymore, because people are listening to every word that you're saying.
Slightly. I actually have struggled with that quite a bit along the way. There's a different kind of pressure on me now. People always want me to say the perfect thing, and they want me to be the perfect gay all the time and all of that. And people project onto me too. Maybe it's easy to project onto something that's basically a drawing anyway. So there is this kind of pressure and weirdness about it. And I do know that people hear me in a way that they didn't hear me, 15 or 20 years ago. And sometimes even that means that I can, hurt people, by what I think is a silly joke, but because who said it, people hear it differently. So I have to be careful, and that is a not necessarily comfortable position for a performer, and especially a performer like me who came out of the crazy, nutty, ad-libby nightclub kind of scene. So I've had to make a very conscious decision that in my live shows, like if you pay to go see me at a theater or something, I will still say exactly what I want, how I like it. Because I figure in that situation, you knew what you were coming to, and you must have known something about me if you bought a ticket to come or something. But I'm aware that, for example, now, somebody might be watching this who didn't necessarily want to see me specifically, but I was thrust onto their screen. And so, yes, in those situations, obviously I have to be a little more careful.
So, national treasure, let's go back to the early days. You grew up in rural Mayo?
Yes, Ballin Road, County Mayo. Your classic Irish market town. Great excitement when Tesco came to town. But yeah, my dad was the local vet. Your very, nice, comfortable, easy childhood. Idyllic, really. 5 brothers and sisters. Boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. My mother thinks North Korean military parades are sloppy. And my dad is the local vet. It was, very idyllic place to grow up.
And it was the late 60s and 70s when Ireland was very repressed.
Yes, but of course I didn't know that till I was maybe like around 12. Actually, I do blame the Pope a bit, or at least I very much latch on to that, because that was 1979. I would have been 12 years old, and we went to see the Pope in Knock. And I feel like that was the end of that period of my life, and sort of the beginning of me looking for something different because, God, I hated that day.
And when did you know that you were different?
Well, from very young, I knew that I wasn't quite the same as people expected me to be. You know, I was interested in different things. I never was into football. I mean, I'm a very classic, cliched gay kid. Yeah, I didn't like the football. I hated being forced to stand in the rain on the side of a hurling pitch. I was interested in art and drawing pictures, and you know, I liked old movies. I mean, really classic. But I couldn't have named it, and I actually couldn't have really named it until quite late. Like if you know, teenagers now know everything. You know, tap a few keys and they can be watching, you know, Brazilian boys doing terrible things to each other. You know, whereas I had zero. There was nothing gay in my life. There was no gays on the television. There was no Graham Norton. There was no gays in the media. There weren't. I remember when Village People were #1 for months on end, and yet I don't ever remember Ballinrobe thinking, oh, they're a bunch of gays. I think we just thought they were 5 guys who like to dress up. I mean, like, you know, we had no frame of reference for a leather queen.
Yeah.
You know, and I have a super clear memory of seeing Boy George on Top of the Pops the first time and going into school the next day and everyone was talking about it. But everyone was discussing whether or not he was a boy or a girl. But nobody was suggesting he was just a flaming queen. Because we didn't know what flaming queens were. I mean, to me, you know, if I had any notion of what gay was, it was Mr. Inman in Are You Being Served? He was the only one. And he was just there, you know, to be the butt of jokes. You know, he's constantly trailed by canned laughter, and that was it. So I knew that I felt different, but I couldn't have named it until I was, you know, relatively ancient in comparison to kids nowadays.
But you knew enough that you needed to get out of Ballinrobe if you wanted to lead the life that you wanted to lead. Yeah,
because, you know, I had a TV and could see Top of the Pops, so I knew there were Boy Georges out there. And then when I was sort of an older teen, The Face magazine, I don't know if you know that, it was like the super cool, hip, fashion design, music, cutting edge, you know, and I'd be opening that and seeing, you know, Lee Bowery is this incredible performer who's long dead now, but I would see pictures of him in these incredible outfits falling out of nightclubs or something, and I was like, I want to be there, you know. So I was very aware that there was an outside, and occasionally people would visit from the outside, you know, my American aunt or something. Yeah. But I still wouldn't have been able to tell you until I was probably 17 or something, or 16 maybe, you know, why was it that I was so desperate to get out? Because I just didn't know what gay was.
So you went to the Dunleary College of Art?
In search of gays.
Go away.
Yeah. I mean, I was interested in art and all that, and I did the art and leaving cert, but my school didn't believe in art. So I studied art on my own. And I sat the Leaving Cert art exam in a giant, you know, exam hall, totally alone. Like I was the only person in it. So I knew I wanted to do something in that sort of area, but, you know, I didn't have an unbridled passion to be a graphic designer or something. But I went to art college because I knew I was in the right sort of general area. And quite honestly, because I thought, where would I find another gay? Probably our college, you know? So, and I went to Dunleary, which at the time was tiny. I think in total there was around 200 or 180 students, I remember. So tiny, and it was Ireland in the 1980s. So I went to art college, and I only found one other queer.
And he's still your friend?
He is. He's still my best gay. Yeah, like we're still besties. And he's, you know, been very involved in all of my nuttery. You know, he's been a collaborator on a million projects. Yeah.
So how did Japan come about?
That thing about wanting to find more. You know, I went to college here in the mid and late 80s, and it was miserable. I mean, I had fun. I was in art college, but Dublin was grey and depressing and unemployed and half empty. And at the time, it was all about, straight guys with long hair, guitars, and paisley shirts. And I couldn't, there's nothing I hate more than a paisley shirt. So it's just like I've just felt I can't, live here. And so I thought, well, I want to go to the biggest city in the world. That's literally what I thought, which I, did whatever the 1989 version of Googling was. I went to the library and found out that was Mexico City or Tokyo. And I thought, I'll go to Tokyo.
And there was a big Irish contingent living there.
There wasn't actually. It was actually very small in comparison to other countries. Most, English-speaking foreigners could get a job when they first arrived anyway, teaching English conversation classes. And at the time, Japan was having its big, huge bubble economy. That there was money falling out of the sky, and so you could find other Irish people, but not many. There was many, many, many more Americans, Australians, or UK, or whatever. I had a great girl Irish friend, and we had no other Irish people in our, social circle, and we knew lots of other, foreigners there over the time. And I have such a clear memory, because you have to remember, at the time, I sort of hated Ireland. Well, hate's not the right word, but I never felt that I could be comfortable there. This was still before Ireland decriminalized homosexuality. So, I absolutely felt like an outsider here. I'd landed out of space. And so I have such a clear memory of, I was working in this giant nightclub in Tokyo, and it came to St. Patrick's Day. And the only time you might have ever heard anything about Ireland there was in and around St. Patrick's Day, and that was a new thing. The Japanese were sort of beginning to be aware of it. And it was the year that for the first time there was a little St. Patrick's Day parade. But most Japanese people, unless they're a James Joyce fan, and there's quite a few of those amazingly, they just don't know Ireland. They think you're from Iceland. But I remember that night in the club, the manager or whatever came up to me and said, and my job was to run around and just make people, have a good time, sort of hostessing, sort of. And he came up to me and said, there's a group of people coming in, they're from Iceland,
Same
and
thing,
I was
really.
like, okay, right. The thought of having to interact with Irish people, I did not want to. As far as I was concerned, I was, had forgotten about Ireland at that time. And I ran around and told all the other staff, do not tell them I'm from Iceland. Because I just didn't want to have to deal. And I didn't want to have to pretend that I missed it, or pretend that I, was lying awake at night dreaming of the green fields of Mullingar or whatever. I didn't. I never missed it. Couldn't care less at that time whether I ever went back, apart from my family and stuff. But Ireland, I felt that Ireland had pushed me out, so I didn't have any graw for it. So I didn't want to hang out with Irish people on St. Patrick's Day.
So was it in Japan that you realised that you could be yourself and that Panti was born?
Yes. I started doing a drag thing in college in Dunleary. But it was a different artsy kind of nuttery thing. And when I went to Japan, I wasn't planning to get into performance and all of that. But I bumped in, I met this American guy who, again, I'm still super tight friends with. And he had been a drag queen in Atlanta, Georgia. And in the 80s and 90s, Atlanta was a real mecca for drag. And we hit it off immediately, just as friends. And then one night, somebody who was, running some club night somewhere and kind of knew us and maybe had heard, that we had drag background, said, offered us a gig, and we did it. And then, one thing led to another, and the next thing, yeah. And I had a different name with lots of L's and R's in it.
Which we don't need to talk about now at lunchtime.
Well, it was Letitia.
Yes.
Letitia, and people just couldn't remember it in Japan. They have trouble with those sounds, English sounds, L's and R's. So I just had to pick another name, and without putting any thought into it, I became, Panti Bliss. Candy Panty was our group name.
Yeah, I watched Conor Horgan's film, Queen of Ireland, the other day, and the footage from Japan is extraordinary.
Yes.
I mean, it was far out even then.
Yes, I mean, we were having a nutty old time. Of course, Japan is actually a very straight-laced society in many ways, but they have an oddly relaxed attitude to what happens in a contained nighttime scenario. They get crazy drunk and then sleep on the train platform and in their business suit, and the next day at work nobody will mention it. That's fine. So they're great at compartmentalizing. And if you're a big foreigner there, they don't even expect you necessarily to adhere. There's more leeway for you to not obey all the rules. Socially, you can get away with a lot more. So we had a great time just running around and being stupid.
And what made you come back to Ireland in?
Well, like a lot of things, I'd been there for like 5 years or something, and it felt like there were a lot of things suggesting maybe it was my time to go. My two best friends were leaving for different reasons. One of them was going to get married to an American guy she had met there. And the other was my drag partner there. He was getting back into a real life as a university professor. And also, I just had I wasn't physically well at one point, and I just thought, is this all just telling me so? I went home, but my plan was I was going to go home, visit my parents, put my feet up, relax, Mammy's cooking and all of that for a while. And then I thought, I'll go to Paris or something. But that was 1995. And I came up to Dublin to visit my friends and that, and I had such a fun time. And it suddenly felt to me, Dublin was very changing at the time. It was the beginning of the boom. Homosexuality had been decriminalized. You were finally allowed to, sell a beer in a nightclub. Dance music and all of that the clubbing culture had arrived. There was money. There were a lot of empty spaces that landlords were happy to let you do crazy and stupid things in while they waited for a developer to come along and buy it for a fortune and build flats. It felt like Dublin and Ireland was changing. The Lewis was being built. All of that was happening. And for the first time, foreigners were coming here to live. And it just felt like things were possible here for the first time. And with the first time, I thought, I think I could live here. And I was having fun, so I didn't leave. And next thing I know, I'm sitting here chatting to you.
There you go.
Yeah.
But you were HIV positive when you got back. I mean, that was a death sentence back then.
Well, I was diagnosed here, and I don't actually know how long I'd been positive at that stage. But it was 1995. Everybody died of AIDS at that time. My GP diagnosed me. I remember feeling super uncomfortable on his behalf because I could see that he was really uncomfortable. And they sent you off to the clinic, and on my first visit, they told me, I could probably maybe 5 years, giving you a Tesco bag full of drugs, 32 pills a day. All had different side effects. Some had to be taken with food, some without food, some in the morning, some at night, some at 4-hour intervals, some at 6 hours. It was a full-time job. And it was just absolutely miserable. And, I didn't even, you don't even have time to think about it much. You're just told this thing. You just have to get on with it. But I was super lucky.
But there was also the shame and the stigma, wasn't
There
there?
was. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Very few people here in Ireland did. Ireland, as far as most Irish people were concerned, we didn't have AIDS. But we did, lots of it. And, I went to a lot of funerals in my 20s, way too many than I should have. But people didn't really talk about it. and neighbors and that were usually told, oh, cancer or whatever. It was all very hidden and miserable. And very often the deaths were very miserable ones, you know, grasping and hidden and you know, sort of pockmarked and ugly. They were ugly deaths.
But it's much better now. I mean,
oh my God, it's not even better. It's transformed into something entirely different. I was very lucky because I was diagnosed in 1995, and even at my very first clinic visit, Fiona Mulcahy, the consultant, she said to me, you know, they're doing, you know, trials on this new kinds of drugs, and early results are promising. And now, I didn't believe that for a second. I've asked her since. She didn't believe it either, because there'd been a load of false dawns and everything. But it turns out she was right. Those trials were promising, and about 2 years later, they really came on stream. And you know, people always ask me about all this stuff, and they want to hear two things, I think. They want to hear that there was a ta-da moment when they said, here's the magic pill. You know, because nowadays I take one pill in the morning and that's it. And then I just get on and I fully expect, you know, to live a long and healthy life. But disappointingly, there wasn't any ta-da moment because they developed these drugs. They're not a cure. They make it totally manageable. But the pills didn't arrive perfectly formed. And it took years of them refining them and working out the best ways of doing things and everything. So there was nobody ever said to me, you know, I don't think you're going to die of that. It was like a slow dawning. Oh, I'm still here. Oh,
good.
I'm hungry. I'm so fine. You know, I'm still living. I'm still doing things. You know, and then there was like one day I said, oh my God, I really should have gotten a pension. You know, because you know, there was a time where I just felt I was absolved from having to even think about what my future might be because I didn't think I was going to have one.
Well, speaking of your future, I heard you recently talking about the effect that lockdown has had on you.
Yes.
And on your businesses, Panti Bar and her sister bar, Penny Lane.
Well, it's been devastating. We've been closed. It'll be 1 year in March. Yeah, so we've been closed a year. And if you had said to me last February, you know, you're going to be forced to close for a year, I would have just assumed that would meant the end of everything. Now, as it happened, you know, thankfully there are some government supports and all that. We are still there, and we've been very lucky with, you know, the landlord of Panti Bar is a vulture fund, and they've been remarkably easy to deal with. I feel bad for ever thinking bad for vulture funds, no. But they've been easy to deal with, I guess because they're so rich and, you know, often whatever country, they don't really care. So we've been lucky in that sense, and, you know, if we can get to open, like sometime soon enough, we'll still be there. But it can't go on forever. And you know, and there are costs still happening that you can't just stop everything, even though the business has all stopped. So it's amazing we're still here. Well, funnily, the other thing, you know, when people find out about, you know, you've been given a death sentence at some point in your life, they want to hear, what did you learn? Because you must have learned something really fabulous. And I always have disappointed because I didn't really. But I kind of did work out one thing that has been very helpful in this period. And that is, even if the doctor tells you you're going to die and you go home, you still run out of bin bags. You know, you still have to go to Tesco and get bin bags, excuse my French. You know, you still run out of toilet paper. You still have to make a sandwich. Like all of these boring, annoying, mundane things, you know, the mundanities of life, is what actually drags you through, you know, pulls you through, because you don't have any choice. You have to go and get bin bags. So these are the you can't just lie on the sofa and cry. And sometimes you might feel like that, but that's not an option. And so those things that are in everyday life just annoying, you know, things, in those circumstances, they turn out to be the things that you're forced to keep hanging on to, and they kind of drag you through. And I think the experience of the COVID, the lockdowns, and has been similar, especially because like I was about to use the vocabulary there, first lockdown, second lockdown. But there's been no difference between lockdown and non-lockdown for me and for the people in the industries that I'm in, because we have no work to go to. So I couldn't tell you when one lockdown ended and the next began. It's not like I'm going to be running around Grafton Street shopping. I don't have any money anymore. So there's no difference to me. It's been one giant year-long lockdown, really. And there have been times where I just don't want to get out of bed because it's never ending. There's these new worries about paying my mortgage and the tax man and all of these things. They're just constantly gnawing away at you, and I'm trapped inside four walls with absolutely nothing to do except think about them. Has been hard, but then I run out of bin bags, and so I have really, I won't say enjoyed, but I have really appreciated having those boring things to do because I don't have my big things to do. And I have a dog, and I now more than ever. I say the very best thing about owning a dog and the very worst thing about owning a dog is that you have to take them for a walk every day. And some days, if it's lashing rain and freezing cold and you're tired and whatever, you definitely don't want to do it. But you have to, and you never regret it afterwards.
Panti Bliss, Queen of Ireland, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me in these beautiful surroundings.
Yes.
Nice pad.
Thank you.